Hello everyone and welcome to Fiction Friday. Today we have episode 24 of The Squire. I hope you enjoy it.
Cole waited until the last of the former slaves had trudged out of sight before he continued down the trail. He had little fear of running into any beastmen, and he'd make better time in the open than walking through the forest. He hadn't left Corinthia yet, though another day of hiking would, he suspected, find him into the foothills and the start of beastman territory. Cole hiked the rest of the day without seeing another soul, then made camp early and well off the trail beside a dry creek bed. 30 hours had passed since he slept, and Cole could barely keep his eyes open. He woke well after sunrise and started off. Jutting roots, rocks hidden under leaves, and holes scattered at random made the trail rough and the going slow. It wasn't until well past noon and the land grew steep that he knew he'd reached the border. Nothing marked it. No line existed beyond which lived monsters, but Cole and anyone else who'd bothered to study it knew that beyond this point no sane human ventured. He grinned. What did that make him? For safety, he left the trail and hiked beside it, careful to keep a screen of trees between him and anything that might patrol the trail. Thoughts of making camp had drifted into his head when shouts and grunts, faint but clear, caught his attention. The shout sounded human, and the grunts came from boarmen. Almost relieved that something was happening, Cole drew his sword and jogged toward the sounds. They grew louder until he peeked around a tree and found a woman with a dagger dressed in a tattered tunic and torn pants, facing off against a pair of boarmen with heavy spears. The fact that she'd survived long enough for him to arrive amazed him. A boarman charged her, and she leapt over its leveled spear and scored a thin gash on its arm before she danced away. The brute seemed angrier that it had missed than pained by the thin cut. Whoever she was, the woman had some combat training and quick feet. Since he didn't want her to die before he got to talk to her, Cole slipped out of his hiding place, moving as quietly as he did the night he took out the beastmen guarding the slaves. The woman gave away nothing, though she couldn't have missed him. When he got within a few feet of the closest monster, he lunged and ran it through. His sword burst out of its chest and it collapsed. The second boarman turned toward him. That was all the advantage the woman needed. She jumped on its back and stabbed it in the eye. Her blade passed through into its brain, killing it. She leapt off the falling boarman and turned to face him, knife raised. Cole flicked the blood off his sword and sheathed it. Hello. He smiled and tried to look reassuring. What's a pretty woman like you doing in a place like this? She laughed, and Cole relaxed. I was about to ask you the same thing. She sheathed her knife and held out a hand. I'm Mariel. Cole. He shook her hand. She had a warrior's grip. Now that he didn't have to focus on the boarman or her knife, he realized his line hadn't been just a line. She was a pretty woman, though not very clean at the moment, with short blonde hair that looked hacked off by the same knife she fought with, bright blue eyes, and a slim, fit build. Better yet, she knew how to fight. I'm scouting the area, trying to figure out what the beastmen are doing with the people they take prisoner. Aren't you a little young to be scouting on your own? Cole sighed. She couldn't be more than 5 years older than him. He never considered how young he looked. He drew the amulet out from under his tunic. I'm one of the Knights of Corinthia, the last, in point of fact. What about you? She stepped closer to examine the amulet. I was with the Rel City Guard. The monsters captured me and sent me west in one of their slave groups. I slipped my bindings and escaped. I've been running and hiding ever since, and I can't tell you how good it is to see a face that doesn't have a muzzle and fangs. Thanks for saving me. Cole grinned. You seemed to be doing okay. Do you know where they're taking everybody? She shook her head. I escaped a day west of here. I found nothing resembling an endpoint. Do you have food? I've had nothing but berries and roots for weeks. Cole shrugged out of his pack and opened the flap. He handed her 3 strips of dried fish. He couldn't spare any more. She gnawed on them with an enthusiasm that would have made a starving wolf proud. When she finished, he said, If you head back down the trail, you'll find where the people I freed turned north. You should catch them in a day or 2. Thanks, but if you don't mind the company, I'll stick with you. It'll be dangerous. Good. I owe those ugly monsters some payback. Cole shrugged. Okay, but don't say I didn't warn you. The two of them headed out, Cole in the lead. Since he had no better ideas, he continued to follow the trail. Mariel kept up without complaint until he called it a day at sunset. Despite making good time, it didn't appear that they'd gotten any nearer to civilization, or what passed for it in beastman territory. He fished out more of his dried meat to share. If this mission ended up taking as long as he planned, they'd run out of food before they got back to Corinthia. "So where were you serving?" Mariel asked when she'd finished her meat. "When the beastmen attacked? I was finishing up my training in the capital." She winced. "I heard it was a massacre." "You heard right. Only 5 people I know got out alive." "What about you? Word is the Battle of Rel was messy too." "I didn't see much of it. The monsters captured me on the second day. I figured they'd kill me outright. That's what the commanders said beastmen did, but they didn't. They stuck me in a pen with a bunch of others. Sometimes they didn't feed us for days. After a while, they moved us west to a central holding area. 5 pens with a saberfang in charge?" She shook her head. 8 pens, though a saberfang was in charge. They kept me prisoner there for over a week while they brought in more people. When they couldn't stuff another person in those pens, they gathered us up. There must have been close to 1,000 of us, and marched us off toward the mountains. What the hell are they doing with all these people? Cole lay back and closed his eyes. That's what we, are going to find out. Get some sleep. We've got plenty more walking tomorrow. This looks like where they were headed. Cole crouched down and examined the profusion of tracks littering a large clearing. He and Mariel had spent 2 days hiking before they finally reached the clearing. 2 other trails met up with the one they'd followed. On the western side of the clearing, 5 smaller trails fanned out deeper into the mountains. She stood, arms crossed, looking at the exit trails. "Where do you think they go?" Cole shrugged. "Your guess is as good as mine. I guess we pick one and follow where it goes." "That's your plan? Pick one and see where it goes?" He raised an eyebrow. "You got a better plan?" "No," she sighed. "Which one?" "The middle one." "Why that one?" "Why not?" She threw her hands up over her head. "Fine, let's go. We've still got a few hours of light left." "What's wrong? You seem to have lost your enthusiasm for this adventure. 2 days ago you were eager to follow me. Now you're acting like it's a chore." "Sorry. I figured we'd be killing beastmen, not trudging through the forest. This is a scouting mission. The idea is to sneak around and see what's happening. If we do it right, no one will know we were here. You rescued several hundred slaves, then killed more beastmen to save me. I wouldn't call that sneaky." Cole shrugged. "This is my first scouting mission. I'm obviously not going to get it perfect the first time." She stared at him, then laughed. "You're crazy." Cole smiled, remembering when Rain had said something similar to him. "All the women in my life seem to think that. The truth is, I'm making this up as I go and hoping I don't get killed." Cole walked down the middle trail, then glanced back over his shoulder. "You coming?" She caught up with him and they continued down the trail. Many feet had worn the path smooth, but unlike the main trail, only 2 people could walk abreast down this one without getting tangled in the branches lining it. It looked like a far smaller number of people came this way. The big clearing was probably where they divided the people up into smaller groups for distribution. If you considered humans just another meat animal, that made sense. He'd seen ranchers do something similar with their cattle, gathering them together before driving them to the slaughterhouse. Cole shuddered. Best not to dwell on that. "How many people do you think the beastmen have taken?" Mariel whispered. Cole shook his head. He didn't like to think about it. There were 3 trails leading to that gathering place. That means 3 holding areas in the kingdom. Let's say altogether they hold around 2,000. If they've made 4 or 5 trips west, maybe 10,000. She stopped and stared at his back. 10,000 people? About that. Cole stopped, turning to face her. Figure 10 times that many killed? Her legs wobbled and he rushed back in time to catch her before she fell. I never thought about it like that. I've just been trying to survive. A maple had blown over a little ways off the trail and Cole guided her over. She sat and bent over with her head between her knees. Cole sat beside her and rubbed her back. Please don't throw up. Hearing someone get sick makes me nauseous." She managed a weak smile. Mariel must have thought he was kidding. Cole wished he was. He'd been covered in blood and guts, watched people around him die, but somehow just listening to someone gag got to him. "I'm okay now." They continued on for another day and a half before they came to the Wolfman village. It consisted of little more than a collection of crude huts built on the side of a hill. Cole counted 30. In the late afternoon light, figures moved around. Some big and others small, and an occasional human worked at this or that job, usually digging or hauling something. The two of them kept well back into the woods. Cole crouched under a big pine tree and tried to study the small figures. He'd never seen beastman kids before. A small group ran around while bigger ones, their mothers he assumed, stood nearby keeping an eye on them. If not for the slaves, it could have been a backwater village anywhere in Corinthia. Perhaps only the males were savage. "Did you know they lived like this?" Mariel asked. "No clue. All I know about beastmen revolves around the best ways to kill them and avoid getting killed by them. I'd never given even a passing thought to their home life. If all the males are away fighting, that would explain why they need the people. They provide both labor and food, freeing the females to care for the little ones." "What are we going to do?" "Nothing for now. We'll study their movements and try to figure out where they keep our people. Tonight, after midnight, I'll sneak in for a closer look, then we can decide our next step." She didn't argue, so they settled in to watch the village. The activity soon bored him, and his gaze wandered farther up the hill. A glint caught his eye. When he focused on it, he recognized the aura of a lie, similar to the illusion surrounding Talia. He was too far away to make out any details, but someone had hidden something up there. "Do you see anything further up the hill?" Cole pointed toward the glow. Mariel shook her head. "Just rocks, dirt, and scrub." "Why, do you?" "Yeah, but I'm not sure what. I need to check it out before we investigate the village. When it gets dark, I'll swing out wide and approach it from the far side." Cole must have dozed off because the next time he opened his eyes, night had fallen. Mariel smiled at him. "I guess you needed a nap." He yawned and sat up. "Did I miss anything?" "Nothing interesting." Cole got to his feet. "Stay here. I'll check out whatever's on that hill." "Should I come with you?" "No, two are more likely to get spotted than one. I'll be back in a couple hours." Cole slipped away before she could object. The night was clear and the stars bright, so he had little trouble finding his way to the far side of the village. He searched around, hoping for an easy way up to whatever he spotted. A narrow, rough path started about 20 feet from where he left the woods. He frowned. A path indicated someone came this way at least once in a while. With no better options, he started up the trail. It grew steeper the further he climbed until he had to find handholds among the stubby evergreens growing near the path. He looked up and spotted the weird glow about 50 feet above him. He let out a breath and kept climbing. Before he reached the glow, he found a flat area, like a landing for people to rest after the climb. When he'd caught his breath, Cole studied the glow up close. It outlined a semicircle in the rock face of the hill. He reached out to touch it, and his hand went through the stone. He stumbled and staggered through the illusion. Cole recovered before he fell and looked around. The illusion hit a cave, a big one, lit by a red glow. In the center of the room sat the source of the light, a box resting on top of a stone pillar. Red runes twisted and writhed on its surface. Everything about it screamed, "Touch me and die." Cole wasn't stupid enough to touch it, but he was stupid enough that he had no idea what he was looking at. He took a few steps deeper into the cave and found the body of a man, about 30, lying on a stone slab. There weren't any wounds, and the body looked too fresh to have been there long. It might have been one of the prisoners. That begged the question of why the beastmen would put a body in a hidden cave and how they killed him. Cole shook his head. This was well beyond his understanding. He pulled the little orb out of his pocket. Time to get some professional advice.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Fiction Friday. If you liked what you heard, you can find more of my fiction on my website, jamesewisher.com. Please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing with anyone else you think might enjoy the show. Until next week, goodbye.